oh, and I'm just like, look, this isn't how I work as an artist. Like, you can't expect a masterpiece like right now, like at any given moment.
Yeah.
And then moments like that make me feel like a bad artist because I'm just like, why can't I do this? You know?
Yeah. So here's the biggest piece of advice I'm going to give you tonight for the audience. Hey, how's it going? You are here for Heavy Art Talk, and today we are going to do something a little bit different. I have Chris, who goes by Dementula as his artist name on Instagram, but he's returning to the show, and we're going to try really just talking about our kind of like game-changing art practices. So basically the things that have helped us improve throughout our artistic journey, and we're going to do it 5 of those. We'll just kind of go back and forth. And the goal with this is to, just kind of chat casually, help other artists, and then also hopefully give you guys a video that's not 2 hours long. So that's the vision. We'll see if it happens. But at the very least, it's a pleasure to have you back on, man. How have you been lately?
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me back on. It is a pleasure. I've been doing really, really well. Very busy, very busy. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, overall good, man.
Good.
We just went to some shows this week. So you just recently got back from Whitechapel, and I went on that Decibel magazine tour. The
yes.
Mayhem, Imperial Triumphant, and Mortiz. That's what I just went to 2 days ago. How was Whitechapel?
Oh man, Whitechapel. Honestly, seeing them live, I think that was like my 5th or 6th time seeing them. And it really solidified for me that they are kind of like the best in the game. I don't think anybody in the terms of like deathcore, I don't think anybody's really better than them. And they just put on such a phenomenal set list. And it's so crazy to see them go from like their softer albums back into the heavy stuff with like such a like seamless transition. And it was just a purely like ass beater heavy set list last night with no soft songs. And their stage presence and whole like setup they have right now. Yeah, really, really phenomenal.
Well, cool, man. Let's get into it.
Absolutely.
So, and we're not going to do these in any particular order, and just like some general thoughts as I was approaching this, and I'm sure you'll kind of agree too, Chris, is like, just because we're saying these pieces of advice, they really do pertain to like what's helped us and maybe what would be like our go-to advice for other artists. I framed it largely with artists who are not like really, really established professionals, although I still think some of these would obviously come into play. More like people who are kind of intermediate level is like
Right.
where I was kind of thinking, because for beginners, it's like you really got to focus on the fundamentals. But how do you get from beginner and intermediate to like working professional, or at least professional in quality? That's kind of where I was thinking about it. And of course, as with anything, I got a lot of room to grow within my own art. So none of this is like holier than thou or any of that. It's just like what's helped me. So that's really the vision for it.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
With that in mind, where would you like to start as your number one?
My number one, it was kind of tough to narrow like a number one down, but I think this is more of a like mental like practice, like rather than like a physical like technique as an artist. But the number one thing that really, really has helped me as an artist along my way is just becoming friends with other artists. And you're not going to meet a great artist out there who isn't friends with other artists. You know what I mean? There isn't like this solo expert artist who doesn't talk to other artists. To be a great artist, you have to learn from other artists. And I think just having the connections with other artists and stuff that I've made over the years, and just constantly, like me and you, we bounce our work off of each other like all the time. Stuff like that really, really pushes me in directions more than I really realize until well after the fact, when I'm working on a piece and I'm like, man, a couple years ago, I would have really struggled with this. I think that's really, really helped me grow as an artist the most over the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. That was on my list as well, as like community. that
Yep.
part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because prior to Heavy Art Talk, I was like kind of existing in my own space. I had friends in real life that were artistically minded and like graphic designers and that did
Right.
some illustration, but they weren't like within this particular scene. And the community part, it's very much like a long-term gain. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're not just going to join the community and then immediately overnight your art's going to get better. It's so much of like these little observations. It could even just be like people encouraging you,
Mm-hmm.
that like kind of keeps you going. And of course, art is like a lifelong journey. So all these things really are, you have to put in the work over a long period of time. But
Right.
I totally agree with the community aspect. Since that was one of mine as well, I'll put it as my number one, and mine are in no particular order. It's just for the sake of keeping it organized. But the other part with like community, it doesn't have to be like you're talking with people in real life, like at like art conventions, although that obviously could help out. I haven't dabbled in that a ton, except for like going to artist alleys. But there's places like Discord that have art,
Mm-hmm.
type of things, and there's like, for instance, the Metal Art Atelier, which is like related to this channel. We have an area where you can give feedback to one another, and that's proven to be really helpful. And it's a really encouraging place. But I totally second what you're saying, where no artist basically has done it completely on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And one thing I was going to add, that one thing that you said as well, is that the long game that you're talking about, that's actually on my list as well. Word for word, it is a long game. And like, and people think like, there's a secret, or like these techniques or whatever to becoming a good artist, or some people even think like, oh no, I'm not talented, I could never do anything like that. But like, no, yeah, I may have been born with a natural inclination to be creative, but I still had to learn everything. Like I still had to put like countless hours, years and years of practice into learning how to do what I do now. And still, I think I'm like an intermediate artist. I'm never going to be a professional artist in my mind, because there's just so much to learn what it
Yeah.
is to be a professional artist, and it is very much a long game, and you just have to have patience.
Absolutely, man. And that was something too, is just like, it's really good to be self-aware and like where you're at with your art. And I find that it's funny, the better an artist usually gets, the worse they think that they're at. They don't have a
Mm-hmm.
good measure of like how either successful they are, which could be like how many projects they get, like the commercial success. But there's
Right.
also the more abstract, like artistic success, which is like, have you achieved your goals in terms of what you want your work to look like?
Mm-hmm.
And I find that a lot of artists who are, maybe not in the right headspace yet, they basically think that they're way farther than they really are. And I know I've
Yeah.
been like that. And then I realize every year that I kind of understand my place. And if anything, it makes me just more happy, not like content, because I always want to get better. But like when you kind of know where you fall, it does make it a little clearer in terms of where you can go, instead of just being in denial of, wherever your skills are at. I hope
Yeah.
that's coming across, but it's a very important lesson to have that self-awareness.
Oh no, definitely. And then that thing you said also about how like as you get better, like the worse you feel like you're at a worse place as you get better.
Yeah.
There is like so much truth to that. And I really don't even know how to explain that, but there's so much truth to that, because like the more aware you are, and the more like you're just like hyper focused on everything that you're doing wrong, and every like little flaw and mistake, because you have a better understanding of like how to be a good artist, and it just like hyper focuses you on every little thing that you're doing wrong as an artist. So yeah, that's a very good point too. I go through that struggle pretty much with every piece these days now. I'm just like, man, like, am I just not that good of an artist? Like every time I'm working on a piece these days.
What part of the artistic process do you usually have that feeling?
Um, I don't even know. It comes in like different parts. Like
Yeah.
sometimes if I'm just trying to draw like a correct like pose or like a correct like body stance of like a character in a piece that I'm drawing, I'll have a lot of issues with getting that like right pose and like not making it look stiff. Or just one thing I really really struggle with too is like connecting my foreground and middle ground. For some reason, that's always been like really hard for me. Then it makes me feel like a bad artist because I'm just like, I can't draw like a landscape piece. Like, this is so easy. I should be able to do this. But it's not. It never is.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I think I often find that sliver of doubt in the like sketching phase,
Right.
especially when I like have no reference to work from at all. It's like, what does the body look like when it's in this position? And to me, that's very difficult. Like I've seen a body and hands and feet and whatever millions and millions of times, but it's like my brain only knows when it's wrong, not shows me exactly how to get it right.
Yes. No, definitely. And it's like,
So it is a curse, I guess.
it's hard to fix that because you're just staring at it and you're just like, I know what this looks like, but why can't I make it look like that? And that's when like those like seeds of doubt, just start getting planted, was when you're having those moments and stuff. But that's where like, we were talking about earlier, the patience of just the long game comes in. Was just like, well, time to just draw it over and over until I can get it right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's like, that actually is sort of a point on my list as well, where one of the points I have says, where is it?
Well, what like number is this roughly for you? So you had the one about community. Is this would be your like number 4 then?
I think, yeah.
It
So
all is like
I
a
talked.
soup. I know it.
It
It's
is
all
kind of a
related,
soup,
of
and
course.
it's all they all like kind of like intermingle with each other.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, all right, yeah. Before we get to that point, I'll let you do your next point.
Okay. Hold on
Because
just
that
for a
goes into other
second.
points.
Cool, man. One that's helped me out specifically in the last year and a half is being okay with specializing and focusing on like a particular look or style or even medium. So if I look at like 2 years ago, year and a half, like if I look at my work, I feel like I was bouncing around a lot. And I still do watercolor and ink now, but I was doing things in like marker, and the subject matter I was working on was kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
And if I'm getting like commissions that are a little all over the place, I mean, I get it, but it was like I had somewhat of a style, but I kind of just, after talking with other artists and just realizing that like I don't have to be excellent at everything, really made me focus on like natural strengths of mine and also
right,
working on weaknesses, and like being totally on board with getting a consistent look so people can be like, oh, that's what Lee does. And then I can expand upon that. But me focusing on like pen and ink and specifically like black and white or very limited color scheme work is very interesting, because if you look at what I was doing 4 or 5 years ago, it was highly colorful, and people are like, "Oh, you do all these really cool colorful pieces." Well, I've shifted, and because of that, I've kind of focused a little bit more on just a consistent look,
right,
and
right.
that like focus could be translated in a lot of ways. For
hmm
instance, like I kind of see every artist, and I focus mostly on myself here, but it's almost like when you're playing an RPG video game and you look at stats, right? I
hmm
like kind of like analyze myself, not really like in a loose way, but like imagine that there's stats. I wrote down a couple notes here. Like, what is your skill level in anatomy? What is your skill level in gesture? Skill level in rendering, color, any of the foundations, perspective, light and shadow. It's almost like if you scored your ability at each one of those, and then you realize that you want to improve at one of them, you focusing 3 months on them instead of trying to improve at all of them is going to lead to quicker wins, in terms of
hmm
improvement. So I think as a beginner, you do have to kind of get a baseline good level at almost all of those. Maybe not. It depends on what your approach is. But when you really are trying to find a style, I feel like a lot of times it's doubling down on those strengths and then minimizing the weaknesses.
Right.
So the number one thing that's helped me out, frankly, is focus.
Yeah, that's actually something I really struggle with. I'm like a very, very distracted person whenever I focus on art, and I have to like put my phone away sometimes and just be
Yeah.
like, all right, dedicate like 30 minutes or like an hour to doing some warm ups before I get started on a piece with like just doing like the same thing over and over again, like how you're saying, like tackle like one of those stats rather than like all of them. And you don't have to practice like, it's like, you're super right. You don't have to practice like everything at once. Like sometimes I'll be like, okay, well, let me just focus on like facial expressions and like the shapes of head and like different like, facial structures and stuff. And a lot of that stuff that like you'll notice as like you're doing like a full piece later on, what you were practicing earlier super applies to that, and it'll come like so much more natural for you as you're doing like like a bigger piece later on. And it's very noticeable when all of a sudden it's like one of those moments where you're just like, man, this is like a lot easier for me than what it used to be, and it comes so much more natural. That's a really, really good point.
Yeah, totally. And I think like it comes down to it too. I've kind of always had like a very detailed rendering style, but when I look at what I was doing about 4 years ago, I would spend so much time on rendering. Whereas if I really wanted to get better, I would focus any of my like study, like art improvement time, like not, how do I word this? When you're working on pieces and projects, usually it means that you are working within your strengths. So you need time to play to work on your weaknesses in a lot of cases. And when you're working on a project, you may be spending hours and hours on rendering, but that's because you have to finish it. But
Hmm.
when you have any time outside of that, you really, in my opinion, should be focusing a lot on core drawing skill, sketch, and gesture. So it would be
Yes.
better and you would improve faster if you did 10 drawings that were incomplete than one drawing that was highly rendered and so much of the time was just like little things.
Hmm.
Um, so that would be like kind of related to the focus as well, as even if you are packed with commissions and you're constantly having to work on completed pieces, even like once a week, you got to like find some time to do some studies or sketches from people who are better than you or working from life or whatever,
Hmm.
because that's how you really get better. You do get better completing pieces, but not to the same level as like really pushing yourself with studying like figure and all that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one thing you mentioned too, like really, really helped me with a lot of like my speed of my workflow is gesturing. Gesturing is like probably the most helpful thing that I do if I don't like have an art block and I don't know what to do, or I'm just like want to practice some stuff, like doing some gesturing as like simple as I can, just over and over. Like not only does it help create like such a solid like understanding of like body proportions, and like how a body moves and stuff like that, but also just like it helps build like visible movement in a piece. And if you can like gesture properly, you can build visible movement in a piece with like so few lines, and it's really
Exactly.
crazy. Gesturing is something that I do a lot. That's basically for like anybody that doesn't know what that is drawing. Like it's like sketching, just like basic shapes of like a person moving. Like, and it only has to be a few lines. Then you don't really have to build like the body structure around it. You just have to draw like it's like a line of action is what it's called basically, where it's just a line of like the movement that they're doing, and you can create so much like weight in a piece with just proper gesturing. Really, really helpful.
Absolutely. And that's like how, you know, working artists who aren't doing like freelance illustration, common example would be like people who are in animation or video games and all that kind of stuff. They focus on gesture a lot because those figures, whether they're in film or video games or whatever, they have to move and they have to
Hmm.
move in a realistic way. So sometimes, like if I really want to like look at gesture and lines of action, I find that some of those animators from like the you know the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, like people worked for like Disney and stuff. Like that's some really good study material because they have to use so
definitely.
few lines and everything has such good dynamicism in terms of those
Hmm.
poses.
Or even like, are you go ahead, finish your thought.
Oh no, I didn't really have anything else, but yeah, looking at some of those like Disney sketches and animator sketches are really cool because you can see it.
Oh
And then
yeah.
of course figure drawing gesture, but um I totally agree, man. And I avoided drawing women and people for so long, and now I intentionally put them in my work because they're always challenging, and then they're also relatable. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like this isn't really a tip, but something that I've been doing more and more is like, okay, we all like in metal, like zombies, monsters, and all that stuff. But when you have the grotesque, contrasted, juxtaposed with beauty, I feel like is even more grotesque.
Hmm.
So I've been focusing more on like trying to fit in beauty in my work to really kind of build upon that.
No, that makes actually a lot of sense looking at like a lot of the pieces you've been showing me lately, where it's just um, like these horrible flesh monsters with like some like
Yeah.
super like dramatic lighting going on with like female body figures and stuff that aren't grotesque. It's like such a harsh contrast, but it's like a complementary contrast at the same time, where it really works. Definitely, I definitely see where you're going with all that stuff, and it is really cool. And that's
Oh, thanks,
like,
man.
yeah, absolutely.
So what I just did my number one, you've done your one, and what would be kind of like your next fully organized thought, I guess.
Okay, this one, I've got a good one for this one,
Okay.
and basically what I wrote down is practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect makes perfect. You can practice the wrong techniques over and over and never develop your skills further. You have to you have to do it correctly. You can't just be like, well, I'm going to draw like 100 skulls today. Well, you can draw all those skulls like wrong, or you can draw like a cube in the wrong perspective 100 times and never learn how to draw a proper cube in the right perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
So
think
what would you advise instead of that? For
um,
those exact examples, with the cube or the skull, just as a jumping off point.
learn how to make a proper vanishing point and grid line or horizon line, and learn how to properly convey volume in a piece with the right lighting and the right shading.
And shape, you know,
Yeah, shape,
like shape and
exactly.
form. Yeah.
Yes, um, because like one technique that's like really good for stuff like that is if you what is the technique where you draw like the lines over like the shape and you like follow the shape as you draw the lines.
Hmm.
Um, you know which technique?
Just
I
like
forget
like
the
contouring, like
yeah
across like the
contouring.
planes and stuff. Yeah, I do
Yes,
that all the time.
exactly. Stuff like that. That is really good for developing like your understanding of like form and shape and where to place your shadows properly. And when it comes to like perspective and drawing a proper cube, just like look outside your bedroom window and look at like the houses and stuff and how they sit on the horizon, and just like do doodles of that and try to properly like angle those, like, because all houses are pretty much just like a cube, you know what I mean? And you
Yeah.
can see it like each house at a different perspective. Just take a walk around your neighborhood and kind of like scribble down, or maybe like don't do that, it might look a little creepy, but do it out your window or something.
Trying to get somebody arrested. No, okay.
Yeah, like why is this person just drawing everybody's houses? um but I don't know, just exercises like that are like really helpful. Just put like a horizon line somewhere and then draw a cube based off of that horizon line. um those practices are definitely very helpful.
What I think I'll state one thing when we're talking like correct or whatever, like with like perspective and how to draw skulls or whatever. I think we're using correct as like you're trying to be realistic. Because
Right,
if you're
right.
doing things like highly stylized, it's harder to provide advice like this. And that's why sometimes it's like maybe you don't need to hear this, or maybe you think you don't need to hear this, but you actually do. It's kind of like that's where the self-awareness comes into play. But I'm totally with you. Learn from really good instructors. Like, the instructors or the teachers you pick or you find are going to dictate how quickly you advance as well, in addition to your practice. So if you find somebody who you really like their work and they're very clear in communicating it, and it seems like the level of their work and the instruction they're giving line up, then those are the people you want to learn from. And a lot of them are on YouTube. To your point with just like, make sure you're practicing correctly. It's also like kind of make sure you're learning correctly, or what you're trying to learn lines up with what your goals or what you want your art to look like. For me, for the most part, I'm trying to make my stuff look fairly realistic in my own way. And I think for the most part you are too, Chris. So it's like that's where we're coming from with our advice.
And like one thing too, I always tell people, if you're going to have like a super stylistic approach and you're going to draw things like not say incorrectly, but like, I guess for lack of better terms, like purposely incorrectly, you have to at least make it make sense. Like you can't just draw a skull with, like a one eye socket and be like, well, that's just the style of the skull. It has to like make sense with like what you're doing with it. Like, why does it have one eye socket? You know what I mean?
You figure out what you want after you've kind of learned the fundamentals, and then you can choose what you're going to ignore from an artistic standpoint.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but
no, you're good. That's pretty much exactly what I was the rest of the thought.
Sorry.
I had this conversation with my little brother last night, actually, because he was asking me like why famous artists who he thinks like sucks are famous, and the ones that he specifically mentioned were Andy Warhol and Picasso. And I told him, I'm like, well, if you look at their early work, like they're actually really good artists. They just developed a style, and the style like kind of made them famous. But if you look at their early work, they had a very clear understanding of like the fundamentals of art, and then they took that understanding of the fundamentals of art and applied it to something which, sure, might be easy for you to do, but you didn't like develop that style. Like you didn't know how like hard it was at the time to develop those styles. Like that's like a perfect example of like doing something a very specific way, very intentionally, with like the core fundamentals in mind. You know what I mean?
When you do have highly stylized work, in most cases, well, I can't say in most cases, but in a lot of cases, it's going to be a lot more subjective whether people like it or not. Whereas if you pursue realism, in my opinion, if you're successful at it, the worst you can really be is boring, because you're at least accurate. So once again, it comes back to kind of your goals and what you want to do. But I do think sometimes people make excuses to not learn realism when it would benefit what they actually want their work to look like. So being honest with yourself in that. Specifically, like 3 years ago, I watched this video, and it's for this atelier. Atelier is like an art school, but not like an accredited like university, more like you learn by doing, and it's a lot of drawing and painting. Like it's almost like trade school, but specifically trading how to be a good draftsperson.
Yeah.
And there's this one school called the Watts Atelier, or Arts Atelier, and there's a YouTube channel. He doesn't post very often, but the way he talked about what he looks for in his new students, and he was so clear in his opinions on art and what is good and bad, but not in like a cocky way. It like really resonated with me, because so often we get obsessed with how subjective art is that we ignore the objective truths of like what a good hand looks like, what a good face looks like, and all that stuff. And most ateliers, they obsess about that objective truth, and it can be for some people confining, because it's like I can't be as creative as I want to be. But if you want to get just really, really good and train like a Renaissance painter or like the artists of yore used to, that's what a lot of ateliers focus on, is that more objective beauty and standard. And I kind of found it refreshing because sometimes we lose sight of that. So it's a push and pull, because it's not always the most creative part of art, but I found it so cool to like have like something to actually measure against, in terms of like, oh, I can see myself improving because I'm doing what this atelier is saying I should do with their free courses. And I can already see myself getting better, because I finally was like, maybe I should just think about this a little more objectively. So I don't know. It's a kind of a controversial subject, and that's kind of the beauty in art. And by controversial, I just mean like what I'm saying, not everyone's going to agree with, but it helped me out.
No, definitely. I do watch a lot of YouTube videos on like art, like tutorial videos as well. Like, a lot of people think like, oh, you're a great artist, like you don't need to like, watch those videos of like the core fundamentals or like really simple stuff. But it's just like, no, I absolutely do. Like, I'm still learning, and it's very important to like keep those core fundamentals in mind, because like how you're saying, like, drawing a proper hand, like even that, it's so important to keep that like in mind when you're drawing, like, like a stylistic hand of some sort. It just goes back to like what I was saying about like how you have to have an understanding of these things before you can like do it in those like ways, those creative ways that you want to do it. And it'll come so much more easier to be creative when you know how to do it, like, I guess, like properly. So yeah, I know exactly what you're saying with that.
Cool. It's my turn, right?
Yes.
All right. So my number 2 is documenting and repeating a process with slight iterations and different influences, to get the right balance of being organized, but also keeping it fun. So for me, I have a process that I basically have been doing for the last year that to me creates the best art that I possibly can. I think one misconception is that a really good artist can just have a piece of paper right in front of them and then they can create the final work right off of that. That's not really how I work.
Right.
I do a ton of research. I look, it depends on the project. I'll take reference pictures of myself in poses or of animals that I maybe, I happen to be close to some like horses and stuff if there's horses in my piece. But basically there's the research phase, which is gathering everything and just kind of in your head start to come up with the loose idea. Then from there, it's thumbnailing. Then it's picking the thumbnail and doing a little bit of a bigger sketch. And that's even really, really loose. Then from there, I get my sheet of paper at scale and I use it on sketch sheet of paper. I cut it and then I just do a shit ton of measurements. So I do like 1 inch, ½ inch. I do all these things and like I can build a perspective grid off that. Or if it's something that's more graphic and flat, I at least can do scaling and balancing the composition just based off of measuring everything out.
Right.
So I'll just have a sheet of paper. I have one right over here that's just a bunch of 1 inch cubes making it all up. And what I'll do is I'll do my drawing all on that. Then I transfer it using a light board. And I do that on Bristol or watercolor paper. And that's where I get really tight pencils. And then I ink or whatever my process is. But that's been my process that entire time. And each has a benefit. That sketch paper, I don't care if I get really messy. So I can get very gestural. I can make a bunch of mistakes. I can play around. I can push the concept as far as I can and keep the energy. When I transfer it to my final sheet, I want it very clean in case I want to sell that original. So what that allows me to do is when I have the light board, I can see those earlier looser marks and I can be a lot more clean with my lines.
Yeah.
And I can also correct things. And then I even have another pass. Some people just ink directly over the light board. Personally, I don't, but people who do, they're saving a lot of time, so more power to you. But for me, I'm not there. But then I have another chance to do it with the ink. So I'm like drawing my same piece like 3 times. Now, is that the fastest method? No. But to get the quality of work that I kind of hold for myself, I kind of have to do it that way at this point in time. Which kind of comes to it too, is like, I don't think I'm like some master artist, but because of my process, I can get the most out of what I'm capable of doing at this point in time because I'm very systematic about it.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the process, you need to assess it every once in a while, and you need to determine, is this keeping it fun? Am I pushing myself? Because the process also could get too comfortable and you can become complacent. So you do have to get that balance just right. But when you have a deadline or you want to have predictably good work, having a set process at a certain point is helpful. I would only advise that probably for like intermediate to advanced artists, because before that, I don't want you to restrict to a process that maybe isn't going to be fulfilling in the long term either. Like you have to have that time to play and figure yourself out before you take it too seriously too. So I hope that's all making sense. And that's just how I work. And your process can be completely different. But the more you're organized about it, the more it's going to lead to a predictable, high quality result, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. No, you're definitely right. Having like a systemic process like that, and it's actually very, very similar to my process. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm going to work on art for like the rest of the evening, and I'll spend like maybe a solid like 30 minutes just like looking at like other artwork and kind of building like a mood board with like references and like different like compositions and other pieces that I like a lot that I could apply to a piece that I want to do. And I only take this process like super heavy when I'm doing like a very like grand piece for like an album cover or stuff like that. Stuff like, shirt designs is like a little different, but it's very, very similar to your process. And in the sense that like you're drawing the same piece over and over to get it right. And that's actually like kind of like word for word what I have as a point up here where I wrote down, your best idea is never going to be your first idea. And it's important to make multiple thumbnails for a single project. And that's like one thing that's super important, is just like making those thumbnails and kind of like building your scene with like your primary and your tertiary shapes and like, your lighting and where everything's coming from and like the movement, all that stuff is like built within like the thumbnails and like those early sketches. But it's also like one thing I find it is really, really hard for me is sometimes I'll just get lost at looking at pictures online and stuff. And I'm like, man, that's really cool. Oh man, that's really cool too. And you go down like this endless like rabbit hole of just like looking at other people's artwork online. So I try not to do that like too much, because then that just falls into like comparing yourself to other artists and then trying to like rip off another artist. And then, which I don't know, all artists are guilty of. All artists are like rip-off artists to some extent, really, because there's no such thing as like a purely original artist besides like a caveman. Because they had nothing, I guess. But
yeah,
just drawing the same thing over and over again. And that's one thing that like how you said, like, is this fun? Sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's very, very mentally challenging. And that's like one thing you also have to keep in mind, is just like how you have to remind yourself why you're doing it in the first place when things begin to be mentally challenging for you. And sometimes it's just best to just like, be like, you know what, I'm just going to take a break for a little bit. Like, this isn't going to get done tonight. I'm just going to like not work on this tonight, because if I push it further, then it's going to go in the wrong direction. And it's important to like be able to know kind of when to take that step back a little bit. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's like if you're a musician, it's like, don't contemplate your decision to be a musician right after you played your worst gig ever.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's kind of a similar type of thing. Like, you're going to have your low points, and that's not when you need to be questioning, should I be doing this? What you should be questioning is, should I be doing this right now, or should I take a break? Like a day break, or maybe 2 days or whatever. Like, the long-term thing, like, don't burn yourself out and keep it fun, but you will have to push through at times. because it's not always going to be fun. It's going to be very humbling.
Yes.
And hit your deadlines, because like the deadline also is going to be related to, if you're feeling burnout, but you have to hit the deadline, my advice, push through, hit the deadline, then take a break.
Yep. No, absolutely. And sometimes I find myself like on like that border of burning out, and I'm just like, God, I really don't want to be doing this right now. And I'm like, blinking out on ideas. Like my creativity is just completely like past its point. Like, and that's when I find myself sometimes doing my best work. Sometimes you have to push yourself to like past that burnout point to really get your best work. It's, I don't know, it's a balance. Like, there's no specific like limit for each person. Like everybody's got like their own, mental limit really. But I don't know. Sometimes that's my best work, is just pushing past that burnout point. And I've definitely been there before. And I've got some good stories about that too.
Yeah. Cool, man. Did you have like another point, or you kind of like piggybacked off mine? I might be taking like a lot of yours already. That's what it seems like.
I feel like we wrote down like the same points, and it's like, it's so funny because like everything that we just talked about within like the past, like your point cycle, this past point cycle, like two of the points that I wrote down were like in there. So it's like I'm having to find something that like we haven't talked about yet. But there's like one thing I wanted to add on though real quick about your process, about like being very systemic with like making like peace and stuff, and like and how you work. It reminds me of like, you go to like Macaroni Grill or something, and they've got like the
I've been a Macaroni Grill like 13 years,
dude.
Man.
Well, me either. But when I don't know, maybe it's been a little sooner than that. But they like put the paper down, and then like they get crayons and everybody draws on the table and stuff.
Oh yeah,
it's so funny when like I'm in a situation like that, or like I'm over at my friend's house and their kids like ask me to draw something for them, and I'm just like, dude, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know what you want me to draw right now. And they're like, oh, you're an artist, you can do anything. And I'm just like, doesn't really work like that. Like, I'm not like gonna like whip up a masterpiece on the Macaroni Grill table right now within like 30 minutes. You know what I mean? And in
I want to see
moments,
it though.
Oh, yeah, I've tried, and then I'll just draw something and it looks terrible, and people are like, "Oh," and I'm just like, "Look, this isn't how I work as an artist. Like, you can't expect a masterpiece like right now, like at any given moment."
Yeah.
And then moments like that make me feel like a bad artist, because I'm just like, why can't I do this?
Yeah. So here's the biggest piece of advice I'm going to give you tonight for the audience. Don't contemplate whether you're a good artist after you compose a shitty piece on the Macaroni Grill table paper.
Yeah,
with
write
crayon.
that down.
Yeah,
with crayon.
That's not the moment to contemplate whether you should continue creating art.
Oh man, that's such a good point. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Let's see.
How about this? I'll go to the next one, but maybe think, because you are primarily a digital artist, or you have a lot more expertise there, if you have any advice on that end, because that's something we're talking about like RPG character stats.
Right.
Digital art in Photoshop, I'm at 0.5 out of 10. I'm very weak at that. So maybe that could be like a jumping off point, not to put you on the spot.
Oh no, you're good.
I'll go real quick though. So this would be related to traditional art and inking. My third piece of advice, if that is your pursuit of pen and ink, is get experience with a brush for painting or inking. But I think using just nibbed like micron type pens are a little bit limiting, because while you can get really clean, perfect lines with these, if you want your work to have a lot of character in it, you could also do this with like a traditional nib pen, like a fountain pen or things like that. Things that just like every stroke has a little bit of nuanced character. What happens is all those small little imperfections or strokes create something way more lively and dynamic when you look at the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very like specific piece of advice, but try and experiment with either brush or nib pen, or just something that isn't so uniform in line. It could be a number of things. But brush and like pen and ink and all that, it is fairly challenging. Like you have to get your hand used to it, and you have to get used to all the different strokes. And hell, there's people who are way better with an ink brush than I am. But even when I create a line that isn't perfect, it has so much more character and life to it. And I feel like it's also made my lines a lot more uh, balanced in terms of weight. So that helps me get like foreground versus midground versus background, because I can control that line weight better, and it just feels a lot more organic and lively. So my advice would be, every day, if you want to try getting good at ink brush, spend a little bit of time with your hand and just getting used to it. And over the years, you'll get really good at it, and it's going to make your art improve a lot. So it's a kind of a very like specific thing, but it's something that has helped me out a lot.
Oh yeah. No, that's great advice, and that kind of like is actually about to tie into what I'm about to say about digital art. But to also bounce off of that, like even like something as like just like drawing like circles like over and over with like different brushes, and just like getting the technique down of like using the brush and using a pen and just drawing like circles like over and over. That was like a very, very excellent technique to like warming up to using like physical brushes and pens and stuff like that. um and yeah, like, people always like say like, oh, digital artists, like you guys like don't really do anything, the brush does all the work. But it's just like, well, physical artists also use different brushes for different like techniques and different effects and different like brush stroke shapes and stuff like that. It's more organic, like how you're saying, but like physical artists do the same exact thing. It's just in kind of in a different way. You know what I mean? Even if it's
Yeah,
something as simple as like crumpling up a paper towel and like, like dabbing it on like the canvas, like that's technically, using a different like digital brush preset. It's the same exact thing.
totally.
Um,
I've heard from some digital artists that kind of newbies, they like think that they need to use like 12 different brushes, but it's maybe better to focus on just like three or four. Or like, what's kind of your advice with digital art? It can be kind of overwhelming in terms of possibilities.
it
How do
is.
you have any advice in that direction?
I do. I have a lot of advice. There isn't a like a digital brush pack out there. Like if you're an artist like looking to get into digital artwork, and like you're like having like, you're struggling with it, and you're finding out like you kind of suck. Like I went through like the same exact thing when I became like a digital artist, like switched over. I had to like basically relearn how to do everything. Um, and I thought like, oh, maybe I'm using like the wrong brush pack or the wrong types of brushes. There isn't a digital brush pack out there that's like the secret to being a good digital artist. You have to like know how to use them. You have to know how to apply them. Um, and there is like maybe a couple dozen different like digital brushes that I'll use, maybe like 7 or 8 in like one piece. But you can do it all with one brush at the same time. You can get the same effect for the most part. You can get the same piece down. You can draw the same image with like one brush. You just have to know how to use those digital brushes. So I would focus on like, it depends on like what style you're really going for. Like me, like I really like these like texture heavy pieces with um, lots of different like textures and stuff going on with like skin, stone, um, like flesh, like ground, like anything like that. I like these heavy texture brushes, are very, very good for those styles that I go for. But I also do a lot of pen and ink style with my digital work as well. And sometimes like even just like the Photoshop digital preset brush is really, really good for that as well. Um, yeah, I guess my advice is like, there's just no key brush for anything. You have to know how to use it, no
Yeah,
matter what you're doing.
totally, man. I think it makes a lot of sense. So my turn or your turn? Because I just realized I actually only have one more, because we both had community, and that was pretty related.
Okay.
How many
Yeah,
more do
let's
you got?
hear. I think I've only gone over 3, and I wrote down like 10.
Okay. Well, I don't want to use my
Um,
last one. So go do like 2 quick ones, or
all
just
right.
it's your turn.
Okay. Oh, this is a good one. All right. Less is more. That's one point that I wrote down. You don't have to be this super, super detailed, fine, like rendering in at like 2 pixels deep. You don't have to be this like super detailed artist for like the effect that you want to go for. Sometimes like a piece is better left with less details. And sometimes you can get a stronger effect with less details. And you just have to know how to like place certain things. Like for example, um, the one artist you showed me recently, Roy Krenkel, is that his name?
Yeah.
He's really not that detailed of an artist. He just has really, really decent brush strokes, and he knows where to put his shapes and his movements. Um, and that's like a very, very prime example of like less is more. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, and then, like for me, it's always subtracting. Like when I was talking about my process of like doing the large sketch, that's when I experiment the most, and I kind of go maximalistic. When I go to the final, I have to cut shit out because it's
Mm-hmm.
like, does it make the bigger picture better? And the way I would measure that is if I took a picture of it and made it really small, does it really make it better, or does it make it more cluttered? If it makes it more
Yep.
cluttered, remove it. So it's like it's better to have 2 or 3 elements in your piece and all of them are very well executed than like 10 things that are like moderately well executed. So
Exactly.
I totally agree. And that's a compulsion I always have to fight and I always have to strip back.
Yep. Yeah, because there is definitely such a thing as like over rendering, and I catch myself doing that sometimes. And like what you're saying, how like you take a picture of it, make it really small. That's actually something I do because I always think to myself because I do a lot of like album covers and single covers and stuff, and I always like think to myself, well, a person isn't going to be looking at this on a computer screen that's like super super detailed. Um, they're going to be looking at it on like their little phone on Spotify, like a thumbnail like this big. So it has to be readable at that size, as well as like detailed and cool looking and stylish, especially for like a metal album cover. So it is very, very like it's very important to keep that in mind. Just like it's got to be readable at a thumbnail size.
Yeah. Another thing I'll do because I wear glasses, so like my eyesight isn't great. But I probably do a lot of my drawing like not really able to see that well because
Hmm.
everything's just blurry. So like that helps me out with like knowing what details are most important.
Yep.
It's kind of a like I think maybe is Monet. I'm gonna fucking botch the quote, but like Monet grew blind throughout his life, and basically his art. I don't know if it necessarily improved, but it changed from that. But basically, you can tap into looking at the world through an impressionistic view if you have poor eyesight and you just walk around and everything's just little shapes and stuff. It actually is like kind of a benefit as an artist because I can see the world in 2 different ways
Hmm.
with through blur or through crisp. So I intentionally draw a lot of times and I can see what I'm doing, but I also can see the broader picture and the shapes.
No, no, definitely. And I kind of like do a version of that where I'll like put the art on my like computer screen full size, but then I'll like stand on the other side of the room and I'll
Yeah.
just like squint really hard just so I can like know like what it looks like at a distance, like kind of blurry. Or like I'll like ask like people who aren't artists, I'll show it to them and be like, hey, what's going on in this picture? And if they can like tell me, be like, oh yeah, that's a dude getting stabbed, or oh that's a mountain, or something like they can like easily like tell me what it is, then I know it's a readable piece from like outside of an art perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What's another point you have?
Um, okay, this is a good one too. Shapes and lighting will control a piece to its maximum potential. Color should be a secondary focus. Your values and your volume are so much more important than color theory, because you can apply like so many different colors to a piece, but if those values are off, the whole piece is going to be off. If the shapes, if like the forms and volumes, if your shadows and your lighting isn't correct, like, and you just start applying color to it, then that's going to throw it off even more. And that's like a thing that I struggle with sometimes, is like applying color to a piece. I always do a piece, I like break down the values first before I start to apply colors. I think values are just honestly just the most important thing in a piece, because that basically controls where your eyes go in a piece. First thing is the values.
100%. It's kind of like if you look at anyone creating like an oil painting and you can see the whole process, there's always the underpainting where they're basically doing the drawing and they're laying down some base values. Digital artists, a lot of you guys work the same way, where you're basically making an underpainting. It's just usually like in sepia or just pure grayscale, right?
Yep.
Is that how you do it?
Yes. And like the sepia, like oil underpainting, I actually did that for the recent Enterprise Earth album cover with like, and you can like, I guess this is something you can pull up as reference.
Well, I have it right here as the background.
Oh, yep, the background. Yep. So that one, I did a underpainting that was all like sepia and like brown tone, and I remember like showing the band as I was like working on it. I'm like, oh, this is like where I'm at with it, and they were like, why is it all brown? And I was like, well, I'm just getting the values in place, and it's like easier to work with like that, and it also is going to bring like the colors on top more to life when I start adding the layers in. And that just, yeah, it's all value building.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Here, I'll do one more here. Okay, so when we're talking about research and getting influences and stuff, in the last year, I've been very deliberate in the type of references I get. And I guess one thing that'll help you out a lot is really understanding how you can utilize public domain. So there's tons, thousands of pieces of art that are old enough. Look up the copyright laws for your country, that are old enough that you can use without permission or whatever. So like, people say things like steal, like good artists steal. Well, yeah, any of this stuff you can use at whatever point you want. So when you look at like album covers, and it seems like people have the same album cover because it's like a Gustave Doré piece or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's because a band didn't have to commission an artist to put that on their cover. But what that means from an artist's perspective is you could use that and use it as a collage, or maybe it's you could take Gustave Doré like Angel if you wanted to, make a couple tweaks, and then put it in your original piece, and there's no problem. Now, do you want to do it all the time? No, but if you're ever worried about stealing from artists who are alive and working today, you just have to control your reference library to be more dead artists or really, really old art, and then you inject your own flavor on it, and then you don't have to worry about plagiarism. Now, you still have to add your own thing to it to make it its own unique point of art. But I just think that utilizing the public domain can be a good way to work from the teachings and the skills of past artists in a way that's respectful.
Oh yeah, and that like it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how like to some extent every artist is a copycat artist. Because you're learning constantly, and you're taking from other artists that you learn from constantly, especially with like a fast-paced working environment, which like being an artist in the scene is very, very fast-paced, because you've got like multiple projects going on at the same time. You've got deadlines to meet, and taking a composition from another piece and applying what you know and what you do as an artist and making it your own, you can really, really speed up your workflow. But there is a fine line of like copying a piece and taking from it to making it your own. And if you mentioned adding some links to public domain websites and stuff like that, there is a couple that I use that I don't know if you're familiar with. I don't think I've ever mentioned them to you or not.
Yeah.
But I use Envato a lot, which is like a paid subscription website, but it's not just like pictures of art. There's so much more elements on Envato with like there's like 3D models on there, and you can kind of
Models, yeah.
rotate it how you want it. If you need
Those
like
are very helpful.
yes, especially being a digital artist, you can just take like a 3D model, rotate it exactly how you would want it, and put it into a piece, and kind of like see how that would fit in a piece. And then sometimes if you need to trace over it, I do a lot of tracing. I make sure like I know how to draw like what I'm tracing though before I just start like tracing stuff. I make sure like, okay, I know how to draw this without tracing, but I'm going to trace this for the sake of like, sometimes I'm in a time crunch. But Envato is really, really good. Also, Line of Action is a really, really good website. If you need like, I use that to practice a lot because they have like, you can like hit like play on, you can like choose like male models, age range, clothed or not clothed, what they're doing, and then you can click play and like put a timer on like each picture, and you can just sit there and you have a timer on like for like 30 seconds, and you can just do like the 30-second sketch, and it'll move on to the next one, and then you just do another 30-second sketch. You do that for like 10 minutes. It's super, super solid warm up. But I also use that. Sometimes I'll just hit pause and I'll find like a pose that I really, really like. And all those pictures I'm pretty sure are public domain as well. And you can just
or they're free to use or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Those are
there's
really, really
there's
good.
one called Sketchfab as well. That it's not just humans. You could search anything, and then what people do is it's like artists who work in 3D rendering software, and then if you like that model, you can pay for just that model instead of a subscription. And most of these models are under $10. So if you found a model that you absolutely love, you pay the $10. You look at the legal stuff, but you can use it as a jumping off point for like a piece then.
Right.
So it's just like, work smarter, not harder, but work ethically as well. And the more experience you get, the more you kind of figure out where that line is. And when in doubt, if you're working off anything that, you have to pay a licensing fee to use, I would just say do it, unless it's like a crazy amount, and then probably pick a different picture. But you just don't want to get in any legal trouble as an artist either. It's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not.
So work smarter, but, keep your morals in check too. Got any more before we start to wrap up?
Let me see. Yes, I actually have one that I think is a really good point.
Okay.
You don't have to be good at everything to be a good artist. You just have to know how to apply the fundamentals to whatever it is you want to be good at. And also, you don't have to be better than your favorite artist at what they do. You have to be better than yourself at what you do, if that makes sense. Like, I have favorite artists, and every day I'm just like, man, I want to be like just as good as them doing what they do. But it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, I would just be like another one of them if I am better than them at what they do and doing what they do. You know what I mean? You're just a copycat artist. You want to be good at what you do, and you want other people to be like, man, like that guy is like, good at what he does. You don't want to be the artist that's like, oh, that artist looks just like this other artist. You know what I mean?
Totally. Well, a lot of times artists hate the thing that makes their art them the most. You know what I mean? Like the thing that makes your art the most like Chris sometimes could be the thing that you hate the most, but if you lost it, it wouldn't look like you. So I'm with you.
Yeah.
And like I think that's the importance of like drawing inspiration from a lot of different sources and not just like one artist, because then you're just an imitator.
Yeah.
But if you have, it's natural to have favorites. My advice would be try to get your favorites from being 3 artists to 10 to then 20 to then 30 to then 40. It's like just keep expanding your horizons. And the more artists who are your favorites that you draw a lot from, the more unique your art's going to be, because it may, everyone's like, oh, it kind of looks like this, it kind of looks like that. If they say like 4 names when they say it kind of looks like this, that means your style is fairly unique, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It's only when they say, oh, your art looks like this and this, or this, and they say it over and over again. And by over and over again, I mean like multiple people, and not the same person just hammering it into you.
Yeah.
But like,
no, absolutely.
yeah, nothing's going to be truly unique. But if you're hearing different things from everybody in terms of what your art reminds them of, you're probably on the right track of having a signature style.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And then eventually that just turns into, people being like, oh, that guy looks like Chris's art or whatever,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
that guy looks like Lee's art. You know what I mean? Because like you've developed a style rather than just try to copy somebody else's.
Cool, man. Well, this was a ton of fun, and I hope the points came across clear enough. But at the same time, we're also just kind of chatting, and in art, everything's with shades of gray, right? There's not really black and white thinking. So some of these points, they need a little bit more explanation and nuance to if they apply to you and when they should be applied. But I hope you guys all really had a good time. Chris, anything else on your end before we start wrapping up?
I just want to say it was super, super cool to see your artwork at the Whitechapel show last night, like literally all over the place, along with literally like a ton of artists in the scene. Like that's just like one thing that is so cool to see these days, just going to a big metal concert and just seeing like all my friends' artwork, yours like everywhere. It was a proud moment for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy how that all kind of came together. Basically,
Yeah.
If people aren't familiar, Mark, Lucas, and I did a live Exquisite Corpse drawing in 2023, like around December. And Mark did the head, Lucas did the body, and I did the bottom. And it was done on this really shitty piece of paper that was super unforgiving. Like you couldn't erase. And we then auctioned those off for charity, or not auction, but we sold them for charity. We kept the licensing rights, and then essentially Whitechapel was looking for something for their singles. They reached out to Mark. Mark was like, hey, Lee, do you have anything? Because I don't have anything. And I'm like, hey, what if we pitched him this? So then we pitched him the design that has Mark's head and my bottom and Lucas's body. And then that ends up being Visceral Wretch, and people love it. Mm-hmm. And I get DMs sometimes, people are like, hey, can I use this as a tattoo? And I'm like, I guess. I don't know. It's more the band, they own it. But it's crazy how something that was kind of spur of the moment and just with some luck ended up being a really cool single. So I'm happy to have a part in that.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny.
And it's like, it's so cool that the art was done like beforehand, because like that is like a very, very strong case of the single cover looking like how the song sounds. Like, yeah, like that is, it makes sense. It is very, very well done piece. So you should be proud.
Oh, thanks, brother.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as we start to wrap up, please, if you don't already, follow Chris, Dementula 3D on Instagram. He's posting stuff all the time. This guy's one of the hardest working artists I know. He's always doing something. Really cool dude. If you happen to be a band that's looking for some work, I strongly advocate for not only just his artwork, but the level of service he provides. He's a true professional. And
thanks.
Episodes like this, if you guys like it just a little bit shorter, I'll probably trim up this a little bit. But I'd like to bring people back on who have been on the show and do kind of more of these topical things. I think it's beneficial, and it's less like an interview, more like a discussion. But if you like what we're doing here, like and subscribe, and see you next time. Thank you.